A broken Navy SEAL thought his family had thrown him away forever, until his wounded K9 led him to an abandoned lighthouse, hiding his father's final truth. In the middle of a storm, one loyal dog, one forgotten key, and one silent warning uncovered a crime powerful men tried to bury beneath the marsh. But sometimes God sends miracles through the ones who cannot speak, and justice begins when a wounded soul chooses faith over fear. If you believe God can turn pain into purpose, stay with this story until the end. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of faith, loyalty, justice, healing, and redemption. The rain had been falling sideways over the Outer Banks since before dawn, the kind of cold Atlantic rain that did not simply hit the coast, but scraped across it, dragging salt through the streets of Wanchese, North Carolina, rattling loose shutters on shrimp houses, shining the blacktop roads like oil, and bending the marsh grass flat along the inlets where old fishing boats groaned against their ropes. Cole Bennett drove home from the ship repair yard, with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the center console, his body still carrying the vibration of steel grinders and welding torches after 12 hours of night work. And beside him, Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, a 7-year-old German Shepherd K9 with a dark sable coat, black mask, scarred right ear, and amber eyes that never seemed to blink at the wrong moment. Cole was 39, tall and broad-shouldered in the compact, economical way of men trained to move under weight and fire. His short ash-brown hair damp beneath a faded ball cap, his beard trimmed close with gray already gathering at the jaw. And though people in town knew he had once been a Navy SEAL, most of them only saw the limp in his left leg, the silence in his face, and the way he always chose the chair with its back to the wall. The Bennett house sat 2 miles inland from the marina, a weather-beaten white farmhouse with a sagging porch, blue shutters faded almost gray by salt and sun, and a narrow gravel drive that curved between 2 live oaks bent permanently eastward by storms. And for most of Cole's life, it had looked tired but alive, with crab traps stacked beside the shed, children's bikes in the yard, and porch lights glowing warm whenever weather came in bad from the sound. That morning, the porch light was on too early. The upstairs windows were dark, and 2 cardboard boxes sat beside the front door, with the careful neatness of something planned, not rushed, not accidental, not the way family threw things together during a fight, but the way strangers packed a room after deciding the man who owned the room was not coming back to it. Cole eased the truck to a stop, without turning off the engine, and Ranger's ears came forward at once, his body going still in that old working dog posture, every muscle listening before any human word had been spoken. The boxes were his. Cole knew that before he stepped into the rain, before his boots hit the gravel and the wet cold climbed through the old injury in his knee, before Ranger jumped down beside him and pressed close enough that Cole could feel the dog's shoulder against his leg. On top of the first box lay his shaving kit, a folded gray sweatshirt, 3 paperbacks with cracked spines, a bottle of anti-inflammatory pills, and the framed photograph he had kept on the dresser since coming home, face down now beneath a rolled pair of wool socks. The second box held his work boots, a tool roll, his discharge papers sealed in a plastic sleeve, and a small tin of Ranger's medication, all arranged with that same hard kindness that made the scene worse than anger would have made it. Cole stared at the boxes for a long moment, rain running from the brim of his cap, while Ranger lowered his head and released a sound deep in his chest. Not a bark, not fear, but warning. The door opened before Cole knocked, and Lauren Bennett stood inside the warm yellow rectangle of the hallway, holding herself straight, as if posture alone could turn cruelty into responsibility. Lauren was 38, tall, narrow-faced, with pale blonde hair pulled into a tight knot and light green eyes that had learned to look past discomfort instead of through it. She had grown up in a trailer near Elizabeth City, raised by a mother who counted grocery money at the kitchen table every Friday night, and that childhood had made her practical, in a way people sometimes praised until they became the thing she decided was too expensive to keep. She wore a cream sweater too clean for the hour, and held a coffee mug in both hands, not drinking from it, just holding it like a shield. Behind her, in the hallway shadow, Travis Bennett appeared, Cole's older brother by 3 years, leaner than Cole, softer around the middle now, with sandy hair thinning at the crown, a sunburned face cut by sleepless lines, and the uneasy eyes of a man who had spent so long trying to keep peace that truth had started to look like an enemy. "We didn't want to do it this way," Lauren said, and Cole could tell by the way she began with explanation instead of greeting that the decision had already become a story in her mind, something necessary, something regrettable, something nobody should blame her for, because life had been hard and bills had been harder. Travis looked at the floorboards, then at Ranger, then anywhere except his brother's face, and the silence between the men filled with every year Cole had slept in the back storage room after Afghanistan, every repair he had made to the porch without being asked, every time he had handed Travis cash from a shipyard paycheck and called it rent because pride needed a softer name. "We sold the house," Travis finally said, his voice low and raw from more than the early hour, and somewhere upstairs a child coughed once in sleep, small and human and completely unaware that the ground beneath her family had already been signed away. Cole did not ask why, because he knew pieces of the answer. Feed bills from the old acreage they no longer farmed, bank letters hidden under catalogs, Lauren whispering late at night when she thought the walls were thicker, Travis drinking coffee at 2 in the morning with both hands wrapped around the mug like a man warming himself beside a fire that was going out. "To who?" Cole asked, and Lauren answered before Travis could, "A coastal development group," though her voice tightened around the words, and that was when Cole knew there was a name behind it she did not want to say. Travis rubbed the back of his neck, a boyhood habit that had survived into middle age, and muttered, "They're buying half the road anyway, Cole, and we couldn't carry the place anymore." Cole looked past them into the hallway, where family photographs still hung crooked along the wall. Samuel Bennett, in a navy blue work shirt, their mother smiling beside him, Travis and Cole as boys on the old dock, and he felt something inside him pull away from the house without needing permission. Samuel Bennett had been dead 8 years, but his presence still lived in the timber and rusted hinges of that place, a hard, quiet man with broad hands, storm gray eyes, and a face that rarely showed tenderness, except when he thought nobody was watching. He had worked most of his life as a maritime engineer, inspecting docks, seawalls, drainage systems, and forgotten coastal structures people only cared about after storms destroyed them, and he had raised his sons with few speeches, fewer apologies, and a stubborn belief that land remembered what men tried to bury. Travis stepped back into the hallway and returned with an old manila envelope, thick, water-stained at one corner, and sealed with a rusted paper clip, and when he held it out, Ranger rose slightly on his front paws, nose lifting toward it before Cole even reached. "This came from Dad's attorney, after probate finally cleared," Travis said. "It's yours. Some abandoned lighthouse property near Cape Hollow. Lauren thinks maybe you can sell it. Might be worth something to somebody." Cole took the envelope, and inside he found folded property papers, a brittle survey map, a deed bearing his father's full name, and a brass key darkened almost brown with age, heavier than it looked, colder than the rain should have made it. The moment the key touched Cole's palm, Ranger moved, not lunging, not disobeying, but stepping in close with the focused urgency of a dog catching a scent from a buried world. His nose brushed the key once, then the papers, then Cole's wrist, and a low vibration rolled through his chest, different from the warning he had given at the boxes, older somehow, stranger, almost recognition. Lauren frowned at the dog as if his reaction made the whole scene untidy, while Travis swallowed hard and said, "It's probably falling apart, Cole. Dad never told anybody why he kept paying taxes on it. It might just be junkland." Cole closed his fingers around the key and felt the metal press into his palm like a question his father had left unfinished. Then Ranger's head snapped toward the road, and Cole followed the dog's stare through the gray sheets of rain to the far bend beyond the live oaks, where a black SUV sat half hidden behind a stand of wax myrtle, engine running, windows too dark to see through, its presence too still to be coincidence. The vehicle rolled forward the second Cole noticed it, slow at first, then faster, disappearing toward the main road without headlights, and Travis whispered, "What's wrong with him?" Because Ranger had gone rigid beside Cole's leg, ears forward, tail low, teeth barely showing. "Nothing," Cole said, although every old instinct in him had already stepped awake, the part trained to measure distance, glass tint, tire tracks, and timing before fear could make noise. Lauren backed into the doorway, suddenly eager to end what she had helped begin, and Travis stood with both hands hanging uselessly at his sides, looking less like a brother than a man watching a door close from the wrong side. Cole bent to lift the first box, but before he could carry it to the truck, The sound of bare feet on the hallway floor broke the silence inside, and Lily Bennett slipped past her mother with the desperate stealth of a child who had waited too long to do the brave thing. Lily was 12, small for her age, freckled, brown-haired, with solemn blue eyes that belonged to a child who noticed adult fear before adults noticed her noticing it. And though she was shy around strangers, with Cole she had always been gentle, curious, and fiercely loyal in the quiet way of children who know which grown-ups tell the truth. She threw her arms around his waist, pressing her face into his wet jacket, and Lauren said her name sharply, but Lily did not let go. "Dad signed papers with Grant Whitaker," she whispered so low, Cole almost missed it beneath the rain. Grant Whitaker was not in the yard, but Cole knew the type from billboards and county meetings. A polished real estate man with silver hair, expensive coats, charity smiles, and eyes that made poor families feel seen only when he wanted something they owned. Lily pulled back just enough to slip a folded scrap of notebook paper into Cole's hand, her fingers cold and shaking. And before Lauren could reach her, she whispered, "He cried," after the man left. He said he didn't have a choice. Cole looked down at the paper only after Lily was guided back inside, only after Travis shut his eyes as though the sound of the truth hurt more coming from his daughter than it ever could have from his brother. And on the torn blue lines, written in Lily's careful school handwriting, were 6 words: "Don't let them take Cape Hollow." Cole stood in the rain with the brass key in one hand, the note in the other, Ranger pressed against his leg, and still staring down the empty road where the SUV had vanished. And though he did not yet understand what Cape Hollow was, or why Samuel Bennett had hidden it behind years of silence, he knew one thing with the cold certainty that had kept him alive in darker places than this. His father had never paid taxes on useless land, and he had never left a key unless he expected someone to open the door. Cole Bennett did not leave Wanchese right away, because men trained to survive ambushes did not run blindly toward the first road that appeared in front of them. So he drove 3 blocks past the Bennett house, turned into the empty lot behind an old bait shop, shut off the Silverado beneath a dead security light, and waited with the brass key on the console, Lily's folded note in his jacket pocket, and Ranger standing rigid across the passenger seat, with rainwater shining along his sable back. The storm had thickened into a gray wall over the North Carolina coast, bending telephone wires and pushing sheets of water across the empty streets, while the smell of salt, diesel, and wet marsh drifted through the cracked window, and Cole watched the mirrors for the black SUV until 10 slow minutes passed without headlights, without tires hissing through puddles, without the faint engine vibration Ranger would have heard before any man. Only then did Cole start north toward Cape Hollow, moving away from the house where his life had been boxed on a porch and toward a place his father had hidden so well that even grief had not brought its name back to him. The road to Cape Hollow ran through the forgotten edge of the Outer Banks, past closed seafood shacks, half-collapsed docks, trailers lifted on blocks against hurricane floods, and stretches of marshland where the grass lay silver beneath the rain and black water gathered in narrow channels like veins under skin. Ranger kept his nose angled toward the open vent, ears twitching whenever the truck crossed a bridge or passed the mouth of a drainage canal, and Cole drove with the quiet patience of a man, letting terrain explain itself, one hand steady on the wheel, one eye tracking every turnout and every vehicle that lingered too long behind him. Cape Hollow was not marked on the tourist signs, not like the polished beaches farther north where vacation homes stood painted in soft colors and rental bicycles leaned against white fences. This place belonged to storms, fishermen, and things counties forgot to repair, and the closer Cole got, the more the landscape seemed to narrow into scrub pine, dune grass, abandoned net sheds, and weathered cottages with boarded windows facing the Atlantic, like old faces refusing to look away. The lighthouse appeared just before noon through a break in the rain, rising from a rocky headland above the water, taller than Cole expected, darker than the postcard image. The word lighthouse usually offered, its white paint mostly gone beneath salt stains and storm scars, its black lantern room tilted slightly, but still intact, and its keeper's house attached to the base by a low stone corridor that looked less like an old residence than a coastal bunker built by men who knew hurricanes were not suggestions. Sea oats thrashed along the path, gulls hung screaming in the wind, and below the cliff, the Atlantic struck the rocks with a deep, punishing rhythm that made the truck's doors tremble even after Cole shut off the engine. Travis had called the place Junkland, But junk did not stand this long against ocean weather. And as Cole stepped out with his duffel over one shoulder and Ranger dropping beside him, the dog stopped in the gravel, lifted his muzzle toward the lighthouse, and gave a low sound that made Cole's hand find the brass key before he realized he had moved. The front door fought him at first, swollen from salt air and rain, but the old brass key turned after one careful pressure, and the lock opened with a heavy internal click that sounded too clean for a place abandoned by accident. Inside, the keeper's house smelled of wet stone, dust, old rope, and something metallic hiding beneath the colder air. And Cole stood in the entry until his eyes adjusted to the dimness falling through narrow windows coated with sea grime. The main room held a rusted iron stove, 2 chairs under canvas covers, shelves lined with cracked jars, a table scarred by years of use, and a framed nautical chart hanging crooked on the wall, while the circular lighthouse stair rose beyond an arched doorway like the inside of a bone. Ranger did not investigate the room like a curious dog entering shelter. He worked it, nose low, tail still, shoulder blades moving under wet fur as he crossed from door to wall to corner, then turned sharply toward a narrow stairwell descending beneath the keeper's house. Cole followed without calling him back, because Ranger had earned that trust in places where hesitation cost more than pride, and the basement air hit them colder at the bottom, damp and mineral, with stone walls sweating in the storm, and puddles gathered between uneven floor slabs. A row of old shelves held lantern fuel cans, cracked buoys, mildew-stained rope, and empty glass sample bottles, capped with rotted rubber stoppers. But Ranger ignored all of it and moved straight beneath the stair, where the floor changed from stone to a small patch of wooden planking laid strangely against one wall. The dog scratched once, then stopped, looking back at Cole with amber eyes fixed and urgent. Cole crouched, ran his fingers over the board, and found a dark stain at the edge where the wood met stone, old enough to have dried into the grain, too brown for oil, too deliberate for storm damage. And when his thumb came away with a faint rust-colored smear loosened by the wet air, his stomach tightened before his mind put a word to it. Blood had a way of remaining honest after people stopped being so, and Cole stared at the stain while rain hammered the roof above them, hearing for half a second the memory of another room, another floor, a medic's hand slick beneath red dust, before Ranger pressed his shoulder into Cole's ribs and pulled him back into the present. Cole slipped the pry tool from his duffel and worked the stained plank loose. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady pressure until the old nails surrendered with a soft groan. Behind the board was not empty rot, but a narrow handhold cut into the stone itself, and when Cole pulled, a section of wall shifted inward on hidden hinges, opening into a space no wider than a pantry but deep enough to hold secrets for years. He lifted his flashlight, and the beam found waterproof cases stacked against the wall, rolled coastal maps bound in twine, brown glass bottles labeled with dates in Samuel Bennett's blocky handwriting, photographs sealed in plastic sleeves, showing pipes half buried in marsh mud, and a leather notebook lying on top of everything, as if placed there for the first person, loyal enough to let the dog lead. Samuel's notebook was swollen at the edges but dry inside, protected by oilcloth and patience, and Cole opened it with the care a man might use for a letter from the dead. The first pages were not emotional, not fatherly, not filled with confession, but precise, dated observations of water discoloration near Cape Hollow, drainage channels, fish deaths after storm runoff, unexplained illness among families living south of the Marsh Road, and repeated references to Whitaker Coastal Resorts, a name Cole recognized now as the polished development group Lauren had avoided saying aloud. There were sketches of underground pipes running from construction lots toward the marsh, notes about county permits approved too quickly, and beside one photograph of a black drainage outlet hidden under Spartina grass, Samuel had written, "If they get the lighthouse access, they control the whole route." Cole read the sentence twice while Ranger stood at the secret door, not relaxed, not proud, but listening toward the world outside, as if the lighthouse had begun breathing around them. 20 miles away, at Cape Hollow Elementary, Mia Parker noticed the third child before lunch, because teachers who had spent years in small towns learned the difference between ordinary winter sickness and patterns nobody wanted to name. Mia was 34, medium height, brown-skinned from a lifetime of coastal sun, with dark auburn hair usually tied in a loose braid, clear hazel eyes, and a calm voice that made frightened children lower their shoulders. Though the death of her husband, a Coast Guard mechanic lost in a night rescue 6 years earlier, had left a private caution in her that never fully went away. She taught 4th grade in a low-brick school beside the Marsh Road, where the walls smelled faintly of crayons, floor wax, and damp coats. And that morning she watched Caleb Morris put his head down after drinking from the fountain, watched Emma Dale press both hands to her stomach, and watched her own son Noah sit too still near the window, his face pale beneath sandy blonde hair, his 9-year-old body thin in a blue hoodie he had nearly outgrown. Noah Parker had always been a soft-spoken boy, small-boned, sharp-eyed, the kind of child who remembered injured birds and asked adults questions they were not ready to answer. But in the past month, he had begun waking tired, sweating through low fevers, and complaining that his stomach burned after school days more than weekends. The clinic doctor, a rushed man with kind intentions and too many patients, had called it a lingering bacterial infection, told Mia to push fluids, and promised blood work if it continued. But Mia had stopped believing simple answers when she saw the same gray fatigue spreading across children who all lived near the lower Cape Hollow marsh. During planning period, she opened a yellow legal pad and began writing names, addresses, symptoms, dates, and water sources, not because she knew what she was building, but because grief had taught her that memory failed under pressure and paper did not. At the top of the page, she wrote one question: why only the South Marsh families? Back at the lighthouse, Cole packed the notebook, 2 sample bottles, 3 photographs, and 1 folded map into his duffel, leaving the rest hidden because moving everything too soon would make the room look disturbed to anyone who already knew where to search. Above him, the wind pushed rain through a cracked window, and somewhere beyond the walls a loose cable knocked against metal, in a rhythm that made Ranger turn his head sharply. Cole shut the hidden panel, replaced the plank, and stood in the basement darkness with the brass key heavy in his pocket. Lily's warning folded against his chest, and his father's handwriting now alive in his hands. He had arrived expecting a roof, maybe a ruin, maybe one final insult from a family that had run out of room for him. But Cape Hollow was not an abandoned lighthouse, and it was not useless land. It was a locked room waiting for the right dog, a map drawn beneath a dead man's silence. And as Ranger climbed the stairs ahead of him toward the gray daylight, Cole understood that whatever had followed him from the Bennett house had probably been following Samuel long before. Cole Bennett spent the rest of that afternoon inside the keeper's house, with the storm dragging gray light across the windows, the Atlantic rolling below the cliff like something ancient and angry. And Ranger posted at the bottom of the lighthouse stair with his ears forward, not sleeping, not resting, only waiting in that disciplined canine stillness that made the old building feel less abandoned than watched. The notebook lay open on the scarred table beneath Cole's hands, its pages filled with Samuel Bennett's careful block writing, and the more Cole read, the more the dead man he thought he understood began to change shape in front of him. Samuel had not merely been a dock inspector or a stubborn maritime engineer who disappeared for days because work mattered more than family. He had been assigned for years to coastal erosion surveys, drainage inspections, seawall failures, hurricane damage reports, and emergency water routes along the Outer Banks. A quiet, technical man who knew how land moved, how water carried poison, and how powerful men hid crimes beneath permits stamped clean by tired county offices. The first entries were years old and practical, but they turned darker with every page, and Cole followed them like coordinates into terrain his father had crossed alone. Samuel had recorded dead mullet washing up near the South Marsh after luxury construction began. Pelicans abandoning nests along the old inlet, blue crabs turning up soft-shelled and gray in traps where fishermen swore the water had always been healthy. And then the notes shifted from animals to people, including unexplained stomach illness, headaches, rashes, and fatigue among families who lived closest to Cape Hollow's lower drainage lines. Whitaker Coastal Resorts appeared again and again, first as a developer, then as a pressure point, then as a threat. And in one margin, Samuel had written that Grant Whitaker did not poison a coastline by accident. He bought silence first, and geography second. Grant himself existed in Cole's mind mostly as a billboard face, silver-haired, square-jawed, expensive and clean, the kind of coastal businessman who smiled at charity auctions while measuring poor neighborhoods by how easily they could be removed. And seeing his name in Samuel's notes made the air in the lighthouse feel smaller. By early evening, Cole found the page about the boat accident, and for a long time, he did not turn it. Samuel had written it 2 weeks before his death, describing an anonymous warning, a truck following him from the county records office, and a meeting request near the old marina he did not trust but intended to attend because the man had mentioned proof. Cole remembered the funeral as a blur of rain, folded flags from old friends who had no right to fold one, Travis standing beside him without knowing what to say, and a deputy explaining that Samuel's skiff had struck debris and rough water, that his father had likely gone overboard, that no foul play had been found. The notebook did not accuse anyone directly on that page, but the next line was underlined so hard the pen had torn through paper. If they call it an accident, ask who needed the tide to take the body first. Cole closed his eyes once, not in grief exactly, but because rage, when it arrived late, could feel like a second betrayal. Ranger rose before Cole did, his claws clicking softly as he climbed the spiral stair into the lantern tower, where rain streaked the old glass panes, and the broken lens sat covered in canvas, beneath the shadow of rusted gears. Cole followed with the flashlight, moving carefully over iron steps, slick with salt air, and found the dog standing at the center of the lantern room, with his nose pressed to a circular brass plate bolted into the floor beneath the pedestal. Ranger scratched once, then looked back, and Cole crouched to inspect the plate, noticing what he had missed earlier, one screw newer than the others, its groove clean, its edge bright beneath dust. With the tip of his knife, he worked it loose, then lifted the plate and found a small metal box wrapped in black oilcloth, fitted into a hollow beneath the tower, like a message buried under the lighthouse's eye. The box opened with the same brass key that had brought him there, and inside lay a VHS tape in a cracked plastic case, a packet of photographs, a folded document tied with red string, and a single note written in Samuel's heavy hand. The first photograph showed Grant Whitaker standing beside a county pier in a camel-colored coat, one hand resting on the shoulder of a younger man in a sheriff's uniform. The younger man was Daniel Cross, now sheriff of Dare County, broad-shouldered, dark-haired then, with a straight nose, heavy brow, and a guarded expression that seemed caught between ambition and shame. Cole had seen Cross only twice in town, a man in his early 50s now, tall and solid, with iron-gray hair, polite manners, and eyes that did not stay anywhere long enough to be read. On the back of the photograph, Samuel had written, "They were together before the permits changed." Beneath it, the note carried one line that made Ranger's low growl fill the tower. "If Cole finds this, trust the dog before any man wearing a badge." Night came hard over Cape Hollow, not falling so much as closing in, turning the ocean black and the marsh silver under brief breaks in the cloud, and Cole did not light the upstairs windows after that. He moved through the keeper's house by flashlight cupped against his chest, checked the locks, set the duffel with Samuel's notebook beneath the table, and kept the VHS tape inside his jacket, because instinct told him the tape mattered more than paper. Around 10, Ranger stopped breathing evenly and turned toward the rear of the house, where the old service door opened toward the marsh trail. A white beam of light slipped across the kitchen window, vanished, then returned lower, searching along the floor. Cole moved into shadow, one hand closing around the pry bar he had used in the basement, while Ranger went flat beside the wall, silent now, dangerous in a way no bark could have matched. The intruder tried the back latch first, softly, then harder, and when the old door held, a thin blade slid through the gap near the frame. Cole waited until the man leaned weight into it, until the lock gave a small metallic cry, until Ranger received the smallest two-finger command against his shoulder. The German Shepherd hit the door as it opened, driving the stranger backward into the rain with a force that tore a shout from the man's throat, and Cole lunged after them just far enough to see a broad forearm under a black rain sleeve, a faded anchor tattoo near the wrist, and a pale face turned away beneath a hood before the man scrambled into the marsh grass and disappeared toward the dunes. Ranger stopped at the edge of the path, trembling with restraint, and Cole called him off, because chasing one man into wet darkness while another might be waiting was how good soldiers became stories other men told quietly. Sheriff Daniel Cross arrived the next morning in a white county SUV that rolled up the gravel path too slowly for courtesy and too smoothly for surprise. In daylight, Cross looked older than the photograph, his hair cut close and gray at the temples, his tan uniform pressed clean despite the weather, his face weathered by salt and politics, and his voice friendly in the practiced way of men who wanted doors opened before warrants became necessary. He said he had heard there was activity at the old lighthouse, said locals worried about trespassers, said Cape Hollow could be unsafe in storm season, and asked if Cole had found anything left behind by his father. Cole stood in the doorway with Ranger seated at his left leg, the dog's eyes locked on the sheriff's hands, and answered each question with less than it deserved. Cross smiled at Ranger and said, "That dog always judge men so hard?" Cole looked at the badge, then at the sheriff's face, and said, "Only when they give him a reason." By afternoon, another vehicle came up the road, but this one was a faded blue Subaru, with school papers scattered across the dashboard, and a child's jacket bunched in the back seat, and Mia Parker stepped out holding a yellow legal pad against her coat, while Noah climbed down slowly behind her. Mia looked more tired than she had in the school hallway. Cole had passed years ago during a Veterans Day assembly, but her posture remained straight, protective, and Noah, pale under his sandy hair, watched Ranger with the quiet wonder of a boy who trusted animals faster than adults. "I heard you were Samuel Bennett's son," Mia said, choosing courage before comfort. And then she opened the legal pad to pages of names, addresses, symptoms, and dates, explaining that children near the South Marsh had been getting sick, and that no one wanted to connect it to water, because connection meant blame. Cole wanted to tell her to leave, wanted to keep Samuel's secrets inside the stone walls, and keep a mother and child out of whatever had killed his father. But Ranger crossed the space before he could speak, lowered his scarred head gently onto Noah's knee, and the boy, smiling for the first time since stepping from the car, placed one thin hand between the dog's ears. Cole looked from the child to the list, from the list to the lighthouse, and understood with a weight that settled deeper than family grief. Cape Hollow was not just his father's unfinished war anymore. The rain had eased for less than an hour after Mia Parker left the lighthouse with Noah wrapped in a blanket in the back seat of her Subaru. But the silence she left behind felt louder than the storm, because her yellow legal pad now lay beside Samuel Bennett's notebook on the scarred table, two separate trails of handwriting pointing toward the same dark water below Cape Hollow. Cole stood over both sets of pages while Ranger paced between the front windows and the rear door, his 7-year-old German Shepherd body, moving with the restless discipline of a working K9 who had been given too many cents and not enough permission. And outside, beyond the tall grass and black rocks, the Atlantic rolled under a bruised sky, as if the whole coastline were drawing one long breath before impact. By late afternoon, the weather radio on the shelf began repeating warnings in a flat mechanical voice: tropical storm force winds, coastal flooding, dangerous surf, unnecessary travel discouraged. But Cole barely heard it, because the pages in front of him had already turned the storm into background noise. The black Mercedes arrived at 4:30. Moving slowly up the gravel path with its headlights on despite the gray daylight. And the man who stepped out was not Grant Whitaker, but had clearly learned to breathe the same expensive air. Calvin Rusk was about 45, slim, carefully dressed in a navy raincoat that cost more than most fishermen's weekly pay, with polished brown shoes already ruined by the mud, silver-rimmed glasses, and the soft, rehearsed smile of a man who had spent his adult life delivering threats as if they were opportunities. He held a leather folder against his chest and introduced himself as a property acquisition consultant for Whitaker Coastal Resorts, though Ranger's low growl from inside the doorway made the title sound thinner than the rain. Calvin looked past Cole at the lighthouse with polite dislike, then said Grant Whitaker respected family history, respected veterans, respected the burden of maintaining unsafe coastal structures, and was prepared to make an offer that would allow Cole to walk away with dignity. Cole listened without inviting him in, standing beneath the dripping porch roof, with the ocean wind pulling at his jacket and Ranger seated at his left leg, while Calvin unfolded a purchase contract already marked with bright tabs and a number large enough to pay off Travis's debts. Buy a new house inland, replace Cole's truck, and still leave money no man sleeping in a storage room should have ignored. That was the point, of course, and Calvin knew it, because men like him did not offer money where sentiment would work, and they did not smile so gently unless the blade had already been placed on the table. "Cape Hollow has no practical value to you, Mr. Bennett," he said, his tone patient, almost sad, "but to the county it represents development, jobs, restoration, maybe even a memorial element for your father, if we handle this respectfully." Cole thought of Samuel's blood-dark note, Mia's list of sick children, Lily whispering that Travis had cried, and the photograph of Grant standing beside Sheriff Cross. "Tell Whitaker," Cole said, folding the contract once and handing it back untouched. "I'm not selling." By sunset, the storm came in like a verdict, tearing across the Outer Banks with wind hard enough to bend the sea oats flat and push rain through every crack in the keeper's house, while the lighthouse groaned above Cole and Ranger, as if old iron and stone had begun remembering every hurricane that had tried to kill them before. Power died just after 8, taking the weak lamps and refrigerator hum with it, and the building fell into a darkness broken only by Cole's flashlight, the occasional white flash of lightning, and the dull red glow of the emergency lantern near the table. Far below the cliff, waves exploded against the rocks, and beyond the marsh, where no tourist road should have held traffic in weather like that, Cole saw one small boat without running lights slide through the inlet channel, then another, their shapes appearing and vanishing between sheets of rain. Ranger saw them too, or smelled what came from them, because his hackles rose along his back, and his eyes shifted from the ocean to the rear service door. 20 minutes later, Mia called from a blocked number, and when Cole answered, her voice came tight and breathless under the sound of Noah crying somewhere behind her. Someone had been inside her house while she was at the lighthouse. Not robbers, not ordinary thieves, because nothing valuable was gone, but drawers had been pulled open, school folders scattered, medicine bottles dumped into the sink, and the yellow notebook she had been using before copying the list for Cole was missing. Mia tried to sound steady, because mothers often mistake steadiness for protection when fear has nowhere else to go. But Cole could hear the shake beneath every word. "Take Noah somewhere public," he told her, though public felt like a thin shield in a county where the sheriff had already appeared at his door, with questions shaped like hooks. Before he could say more, the line crackled, and Lily Bennett's name flashed across the screen. Lily was whispering from what sounded like a closet or bathroom, her breath too fast, her 12-year-old courage stretched thin, but unbroken. Grant Whitaker had come to the Bennett house himself after dark, not with Calvin this time, but with 2 men in black jackets, and Travis had been made to sit at the kitchen table while papers were spread in front of him, and Lauren cried quietly near the sink. Grant, Lily said, was tall and silver-haired, clean-shaven, handsome in a cold way, with a deep voice that made adults nod before they realized they were being cornered. And he had told Travis that selling the farmhouse had only been the beginning, that access rights, shoreline easements, and Cape Hollow signatures had to be finished before the storm damage delayed investment. "Dad said he didn't know," Lily whispered, and the man said knowing was expensive. Then her voice dropped lower. "Uncle Cole." Dad looked scared. The first window broke at the back of the keeper's house before Cole could answer, not shattered by wind, but punched inward with a tool, glass skidding across the stone floor as the storm screamed through the opening and Ranger launched into motion before the phone hit the table. Cole killed the lantern with one sweep of his hand and pulled Mia's list and Samuel's notebook into the duffel as boots hit the rear threshold. 2 men entering low, flashlights cutting through the black, one carrying a pistol close to his chest, the other sweeping toward the basement stair where the hidden room waited behind stone. The man with the anchor tattoo came first, broad and heavy under a wet black jacket, his face pale beneath a knit cap, while the second was younger, nervous, chewing gum even in the middle of a break-in, which told Cole he feared silence more than violence. Ranger hit the tattooed man from the side, driving him into the wall with a crash that shook old dust from the beams, and Cole moved through darkness behind the dog, all angles, breath, distance, the old SEAL training returning without drama because survival did not need music. For a while, the lighthouse was only fragments, lightning in the windows, a flashlight spinning across the floor, Ranger's growl, a man cursing, the smell of wet wool and gun oil, Cole's elbow driving into bone, the younger intruder stumbling toward the stair with Samuel's map tube in one hand before Cole ripped it away and slammed him into the table. Then the pistol came up from the floor, not aimed at Cole at first, but toward Ranger as the dog turned back to protect him, and Cole saw the line of it too late. Ranger moved anyway, because that was what he had been trained to do and what loyalty had made permanent, and the gunshot cracked inside the stone house with a force that swallowed the storm for one brutal second. The German Shepherd yelped once, short and sharp, and went down hard near the stove, blood darkening the fur high on his shoulder as the intruders scrambled back through the broken window and vanished toward the marsh. Not victorious, not finished, only carrying the message Grant had sent. Cole reached Ranger before the dog could try to rise, pressing one hand hard over the wound while his other searched the old first aid kit he had found in a cabinet beside the lantern fuel. "Stay with me," he whispered, and the words came out too close to pleading for a man who had once been praised for staying calm under fire. Ranger's amber eyes remained on him, trusting, unbearably steady, and that nearly broke Cole more than the blood did, because this dog had followed him through nightmares, storage rooms, cold roads, and the last thin edges of a life no one else had wanted to stand beside. He packed gauze into the wound, wrapped pressure tight with strips torn from an old towel, checked for an exit wound with hands that remembered battlefield medicine, even while his chest tightened with the fear of losing the only living creature that had never asked him to be easier to love. Outside, engines coughed somewhere in the marsh, boats or trucks or both, and then faded beneath the rain. Near midnight, with Ranger breathing heavily beside the stove and the storm still clawing at the lighthouse, Cole finally loaded Samuel's VHS tape into the old player he had found beneath a canvas cover in the lantern room storage cabinet, connecting it to a small box television powered by the emergency battery. The image rolled in static first, then cleared enough to show Samuel Bennett standing in the marsh years earlier under a night sky, thinner than Cole remembered, his face bruised along one cheek, filming from behind tall grass, while men in Whitaker rain jackets rolled black barrels from a flatbed truck into a trench near the drainage channel. Grant Whitaker appeared in the frame, younger but unmistakable, silver hair darkened by rain, pointing toward the earth, while heavy equipment covered the barrels with mud. And Samuel's voice whispered from behind the camera that if he died, it would not be from weather or poor seamanship. The tape jumped, flickered, and returned to Samuel seated inside the lighthouse, eyes fixed on the lens as he said, "Cape Hollow isn't just land, Cole. It is the only thing stopping them." And then the picture snapped into static, leaving Cole in the storm-dark room with Ranger bleeding beside him and the unfinished truth burning brighter than the dead screen. By morning, the worst of the storm had moved out over the Atlantic, leaving Cape Hollow washed in a bruised silver light, with broken reeds flattened across the marsh, salt water pooled in the low road, and the lighthouse standing above the cliff like a wounded guard that had survived another night because it did not know how to fall. Cole Bennett sat at the scarred table with Samuel's notebook, the copied maps, the damaged VHS tape, and Mia Parker's list spread in front of him while Ranger lay near the iron stove with his shoulder wrapped tight in blood-spotted gauze, breathing slow but watching every movement Cole made with those steady amber eyes that had not lost their old working discipline even through pain. The final words on the tape kept turning in Cole's mind. Cape Hollow isn't just land, it is the only thing stopping them. And when he laid the old shoreline easement papers beside the construction maps, the truth finally locked into place, with the cold precision of a weapon being assembled. Cape Hollow controlled the only legal access route through the South Marsh, not just the foot trail tourists might one day use for a scenic boardwalk, but the original service road, drainage corridor, and submerged utility passage that Whitaker Coastal Resorts needed to reach the buried waste trench and the future resort foundation without triggering federal wetland review. Samuel had known it, Grant Whitaker had known it, and Travis had been pushed because family pressure was cheaper than court fights, because a brother with debts could be turned faster than a county office, and because once Cole signed, the lighthouse would become another restored landmark in a glossy brochure while the marsh underneath stayed poisoned. Cole stared at his father's old survey marks until anger passed through him and left behind something more useful. Not forgiveness, not calm, but direction. Ranger lifted his head as if he felt the change in the room, and Cole reached down, careful of the bandage, resting 2 fingers against the dog's neck. He wasn't protecting a building, Cole murmured. He was holding the gate. Travis arrived before noon in Lauren's minivan, driving too fast through the washed-out gravel and stopping too hard near the lighthouse steps, and the man who climbed out looked like he had aged 10 years since Cole had last seen him on the porch. Rain had flattened his sandy hair against his forehead. His face was pale under the coastal sun, and his hands shook slightly as he crossed the yard, not from cold alone, but from the knowledge that cowardice stops feeling safe the moment the people you wanted to protect begin paying for it. Travis Bennett had never been cruel in the clean, direct way Lauren could be. He was weaker than cruel, a tired older brother who hated conflict, loved his daughter, feared losing his house, and had spent years convincing himself that survival and surrender were sometimes the same thing. Ranger growled when Travis stepped inside, not loud, just enough to make him stop. "I deserve that," Travis said, looking at the bandage, and Cole's jaw tightened because the dog's blood still looked wet through the cloth. Travis told the truth in pieces at first, the way frightened men carry heavy things, by shifting them from hand to hand, admitting that Grant had visited 2 months earlier, that Whitaker Coastal Resorts had offered to clear the mortgage, protect Lily's college fund, and let the family keep a smaller inland property if Travis signed preliminary access papers connected to Cape Hollow. He had told himself it was only paperwork, only development rights, only something Samuel would have wasted out of spite, until Lily started crying at night, until Grant's men came after dark, until he heard from Lauren that Noah Parker was sick and that Mia's house had been searched after she went to see Cole. "I didn't know about the chemicals," Travis said, and his voice broke on the word chemicals, as if saying it made him smaller. Cole wanted to throw him out, wanted to let Travis stand in the mud with everything he had signed and everything he had refused to ask. But Samuel's file sat between them, Mia's list beside it, Ranger breathing through pain at his feet, and family anger suddenly looked too narrow for the size of the crime. The plan formed because Grant believed desperate men stayed desperate, and because Travis, for the first time in years, agreed to do something that might cost him instead of save him. He called Whitaker from the Lighthouse landline while Cole listened, telling him Cole was scared, that Ranger was hurt, that the tape existed, but Cole wanted money and a way out before federal people got involved. And Grant's voice on the speaker came smooth and controlled, pleased by the shape of fear, because men like him mistook manipulation for intelligence. The meeting would be at the old wooden bridge across the South Marsh after dark, where the broken county road narrowed over black water, and there were no houses close enough to hear anything but frogs, wind, and the creak of wet boards. Mia took Noah and Lily to a closed church hall inland, carrying duplicate photographs, copied symptom lists, and a flash drive Cole had made from the tape. And before she left, she looked at Ranger with a teacher's quiet grief, and at Cole with something steadier than pity. "Do not make my son another name in your father's notebook," she said. And Cole nodded because promises mattered more when they were almost impossible. Night settled over the marsh, clear and cold after the storm, with clouds torn open enough for moonlight to silver the standing water and make every broken reed look like a blade. Cole reached the old bridge first, wearing a small recorder taped beneath his collar, Samuel's easement papers folded inside his jacket, and the heavy exhaustion of a man whose injured leg had not stopped throbbing since the night before. Ranger moved beside him in a dark wrap Cole had cut from an old canvas coat, slower now, each step measured to protect the wounded shoulder, but still unwilling to be left behind, no matter how softly Cole had ordered it. Travis waited half a mile away in the minivan with the receiving unit Mia had borrowed from the school media closet. His job simple enough to terrify him. Keep the signal alive, do not run, and send the recording if Cole failed. The bridge itself was old cypress and rusted bolts, slick from rain, sagging slightly over the black marsh channel, where floodwater moved beneath in slow, oily swirls. Grant Whitaker arrived in a white SUV with 2 trucks behind him, stepping out in a charcoal coat and leather gloves as if he had come to inspect a hotel site instead of a dying marsh, silver hair combed back, handsome face lit by the headlights, every motion calm, with the confidence of a man who had paid others to panic on his behalf. 2 armed men spread near the bridge rail, one of them the broad man with the faded anchor tattoo on his wrist, and another held back near the trucks, watching Ranger with the nervous respect of someone who remembered teeth in the dark. Grant smiled at Cole the way donors smiled at veterans on stage. "Your father should have taken the first offer," he said, and Cole let the silence stretch, because silence made arrogant men decorate their own traps. Grant talked about jobs, tax revenue, dying towns, families needing work, and then, because he believed Cole was beaten, and because the recorder beneath Cole's collar blinked too small to see at that distance, he talked about Samuel as if the dead man had been a stubborn inconvenience who forced everyone else into difficult decisions. Cole pushed him, not with shouting, but with facts, naming the barrels, the children, the buried drainage trench, the boat accident, the permits Cross had signed, and with every sentence Grant's polite mask thinned until the man beneath it showed through, colder, sharper, irritated by morality because morality was inefficient. "Your father did not understand scale," Grant said. his voice lowering as the marsh wind moved through the bridge rails. A few sick families, a few dead fish, that is not a tragedy to men who build futures, that is the cost of transition. Ranger growled so deeply that even Grant glanced at him. Cole stepped closer. And killing Samuel? Grant's smile returned, smaller now. Samuel Bennett put himself in bad weather with bad people after refusing every civilized solution, he said. History will call that an accident, because history is written by men who can afford lawyers. For one clear second, Cole felt the recorder against his chest like a heartbeat, and in the distance, he hoped Travis was still listening. The plan broke when the anchor-tattooed man saw the red blink beneath Cole's collar, as lightning flickered beyond the coast, and his shout turned the bridge into motion. A flashlight snapped up. A pistol came free. Grant cursed, and Cole drove his shoulder into the nearest rail as the first shot tore through wet wood behind him. Ranger moved despite the wound, launching low into the tattooed man's legs, not with the full force he would have had yesterday, but with enough loyalty to break balance and buy Cole one breath. The bridge boards, rotten beneath years of salt and storm water, cracked under the sudden weight of running men, and as Grant backed away toward the SUV, the center span sagged, split, and dropped one side into the marsh channel with a long wooden scream. Grant fell through the broken rail into the black water below, his expensive coat vanishing under mud and floodwater before his hands clawed back into view. And for one terrible moment, Cole stood above him, with a gun pointed somewhere in the dark, a wounded dog bleeding again beside him, and the memory of Samuel's dead face pressing its hand against his chest. Ranger barked once, sharp, painful, furious, and that sound did what revenge could not, pulling Cole back to the man he still wanted to be, rather than the weapon Grant had helped sharpen. Cole dropped to his stomach on the slick boards, reached through the broken rail, and caught Grant's wrist as the marsh current dragged at him, hauling him inch by inch through mud and rainwater, while the bridge groaned beneath both of them. Headlights burst on from the far side, and Sheriff Daniel Cross stepped from the reeds with a shotgun lowered toward Grant's men and two deputies behind him, his face older than it had looked at the lighthouse, his badge dark with rain, his eyes no longer avoiding what they saw. In one hand, he held his own recorder, and when Grant, coughing black water, tried to speak, Cross said quietly that his daughter Emily had lived with rashes, fevers, and liver damage for 3 years because he had been too afraid of Whitaker's threats to tell the truth. Emily Cross, 16, once a strong soccer player with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn smile, now spent half her afternoons asleep beside medical bills he could not explain away, and the shame of that had finally become heavier than fear. Cross looked at Cole, then at the easement papers, then at the marsh where the bridge still trembled, and said, "I recorded everything, and by sunrise, every copy goes federal." Grant Whitaker was arrested before sunrise, not with cameras flashing and speeches prepared, but soaked in marsh water, wrapped in a county blanket, and sitting in the back of a federal vehicle with mud on his expensive shoes and fear finally showing through the polished face. He had spent a lifetime teaching men to trust. By noon, Cape Hollow was no longer a forgotten strip of coastline whispered about by fishermen and developers, because Sheriff Daniel Cross's recording, Samuel Bennett's VHS tape, Mia Parker's patient list, and the Lighthouse easement papers had moved faster than Whitaker's lawyers could contain them, traveling from county hands to federal investigators, to environmental teams who arrived in white trucks marked with government seals. Special Agent Karen Ellis led the first team onto the property, a short, broad-shouldered woman in her late 40s with close-cut black hair, tired brown eyes, and the calm directness of someone who had built her career by listening to evidence before listening to powerful men. And when she shook Cole Bennett's hand outside the damaged lighthouse, she did not thank him like a hero. She simply said, "Your father left a map, but you kept it alive." Within 3 days, Whitaker Coastal Resorts began collapsing in public, one headline at a time, with sealed warrants, frozen accounts, resigned board members, and quiet plea agreements appearing behind the polished language of corporate statements, while Grant's name, once printed on charity plaques and waterfront banners, became attached to illegal dumping, bribery, falsified inspections, witness intimidation, and the suspicious death of Samuel Bennett. Environmental crews moved through the South Marsh in Tyvek suits and rubber boots, pushing survey flags into mud, drilling through poisoned soil, and uncovering the first of the black barrels exactly where Samuel's tape had shown them being buried years earlier. Dr. Paula Sloan, the lead environmental toxicologist, was a tall, silver-haired woman with sun-spotted hands and a voice softened by years of explaining terrible things to frightened communities. She had spent 2 decades testing damaged wetlands after hurricanes and industrial spills, and when she knelt beside the first leaking barrel with her testing kit open in the grass, her expression did not change. But Cole saw her jaw tighten in the way honest people reacted when proof confirmed the worst version of a story. The school was tested next, then the wells along the South Marsh Road, then the pipes beneath the old county lots, and Mia Parker stood in the elementary gym with Noah at her side while nurses drew blood from children whose parents had been told for years that stomach pain, rashes, fatigue, and strange fevers were just coastal sickness, bad luck, or weak immune systems. Mia looked exhausted but unbroken, her auburn braid pulled over one shoulder, her legal pad now copied into official files, and her voice remained steady as she helped other mothers fill out forms and spell addresses through tears. Noah, still thin in his blue hoodie but already brighter in the eyes after clean water deliveries began, carried a paperback under one arm and asked Agent Ellis if Ranger would get a badge too, which made the federal woman smile for the first time that week. Cole watched the boy from the doorway with Ranger leaning against his leg, the German Shepherd's shoulder still shaved and stitched beneath a clean wrap, and he felt something inside him loosen when Noah lifted one hand in greeting and Ranger thumped his tail once against the gym floor like a tired old king, accepting tribute. Travis came to the Lighthouse on the 7th day after Grant's arrest, not in Lauren's minivan this time, but alone in the old farm truck Samuel used to drive, its paint faded, its bumper rusted, and its bed filled with cedar boards, hand tools, and a coil of rope for the broken bridge. He climbed out slowly, looking thinner than before, with dark half-moons under his eyes and shame sitting across his shoulders heavier than any raincoat, while Lily stepped from the passenger side carrying a small paper bag of dog treats and the careful hope of a child who wanted the adults she loved to stop hurting each other without pretending nothing had happened. Travis did not start with excuses, and that mattered, because excuses had always been the language he used when truth frightened him. He stood near the lighthouse steps, facing Cole and Ranger, and said in a voice rough enough to be real, "I chose quiet because it looked safer than truth, and Dad paid for that before I ever understood what I was helping them do." Cole did not hug him, did not tell him everything was fine, did not offer the easy forgiveness people sometimes demand from wounded men so everyone else can breathe again. But after a long silence, he nodded toward the broken bridge plans on the truck seat and said, "Then help fix what you helped break." Lily became part of Cape Hollow faster than any adult did, because children who survive fear often understand repair before they understand politics. She was still small, still freckled, still quiet around strangers, but around Ranger she moved with the gentle seriousness of a nurse in training, changing his water bowl, counting his pills under Cole's eye, and sitting beside him on the porch, while the old K9 watched the marsh with ears that had not forgotten danger, even after danger had finally begun to lose. One afternoon, while Travis and Cole worked in silence near the road, Lily found the weathered wooden sign half buried in beach grass beside the gate, its white paint peeled almost to gray, its lettering faint beneath years of salt and neglect. She sanded it by hand, repainted each word with careful strokes, and when she finally nailed it back to the post, the letters read, "Cape Hollow Light." No resort logo, no sales banner, no polished promise, just the old name standing again at the entrance, like Samuel Bennett had been waiting for someone small enough and brave enough to put it back. Mia and Cole did not become a love story overnight, because both of them had lost too much to trust anything that arrived loudly. She came by first to bring medical updates, then schoolwork for Noah during follow-up appointments, then boxes of donated books for the Lighthouse rooms. Cole had begun clearing above the keeper's house, and each visit lasted a little longer than the one before. Mia was careful with him in a way that did not feel fragile, and Cole was quiet with her in a way that did not feel empty. Two people standing near the same shoreline, with different storms behind them, learning that trust could begin as coffee left on a table, a ride offered before dark, a hand resting briefly on the rail while neither person forced the moment to become more than it was. Noah treated Ranger like a legend, reading adventure books aloud beside him while the dog slept in the sun, and Ranger, who had once guarded doors, convoys, and wounded men overseas, now guarded a pale 9-year-old boy with one paw stretched across the porch boards, as if the child were another mission he had accepted without needing orders. By early summer, Cape Hollow Light had changed shape without losing its bones. The downstairs storage rooms became a boat repair shop where Cole worked on skiffs, engines, winches, and storm-damaged hulls for fishermen who paid when they could and brought coffee when they could not, while the upper keepers' quarters became clean sleeping rooms with army cots, donated quilts, and windows looking over the Atlantic instead of brick walls or shelter ceilings. Veterans began arriving quietly after Mia mentioned the place through a school family who knew a Marine support network, and the first was Ray Hollis, a former Army medic from Wyoming, tall, gaunt, red-bearded, and soft-spoken, a man who could set a broken wrist without blinking, but could not sleep indoors unless a door stayed open. After him came Ben Carter, a former Navy corpsman with both legs gone below the knee, wide shoulders, sharp humor, and a drinking problem he admitted only after Ranger refused to leave his bedside on the second night. Cole did not call the place a program, did not print flyers, did not make speeches. He just opened the door, fixed what needed fixing, and let broken men understand that no one there would ask them to explain every scar before offering them a bed. Sheriff Cross retired before the end of June, handing in his badge without ceremony and showing up at Cape Hollow the next morning in work jeans, a faded county ball cap, and the expression of a man who knew retirement would not erase guilt, but might give him time to spend the rest of his strength against it. He helped federal teams identify old permit routes, testified until his voice went hoarse, and on quiet weekends he hauled lumber with Travis, repaired railings, and sat sometimes at the edge of the marsh, watching environmental crews restore the water that had hurt his daughter Emily and so many others. Emily Cross visited once in late July, a slim 16-year-old with dark hair, careful steps, and yellow sunglasses hiding the tiredness illness had put around her eyes. And when she saw Noah chasing gulls near the fence while Ranger limped after him at a dignified pace, she smiled like someone seeing proof that recovery did not always arrive all at once. But it could arrive. The water changed slowly, the way wounded things often do, not by miracle in a single morning, but by testing, dredging, filtration, court orders, clean wells, and the stubborn patience of people who refused to look away again. Fish returned first in small silver flashes near the inlet, then fiddler crabs appeared along the banks, then herons came back to hunt in the shallows where warning signs had once stood. The old wooden bridge was rebuilt by late August, not glossy and tourist perfect, but strong, plain, and safe, with Travis setting the final boards while Cole held the rail and Lily painted the last coat of sealant along the posts. Lauren did not come often, but when she did, she stood back and watched quietly, her sharpness dulled by what fear had cost everyone, and Cole accepted that some repairs would remain unfinished longer than others. He had learned that healing was not the same as forgetting, and forgiveness, when it came honestly, moved slower than tides. On a warm morning near the end of summer, Cole stood on the balcony of the Lighthouse, with black coffee cooling in his hand, while the sun rose over the Atlantic, laying gold across the water, the marsh, the rebuilt bridge, and the sign Lily had painted at the gate. Ranger lay beside his boots, older now in the way pain can age a loyal body, one shoulder still stiff, one front step forever changed, but his amber eyes remained clear as he watched the yard below, where Noah read on the steps. Lily laughed with Emily near the fence. Travis carried lumber toward the workshop, Mia handed out breakfast to 2 veterans, and 3 abandoned service dogs chased each other through grass that had once hidden poison. Cole thought of Samuel Bennett standing alone in the same wind years earlier, hiding maps, recording crimes, paying taxes on land everyone else called useless. And for the first time he understood the shape of the gift his father had left behind. It had never been only a lighthouse, never only property, never only proof. It was a light left burning for men who had lost roads, families who had lost trust, children who had lost health, dogs who had lost handlers, and every broken soul still trying to find the way home. Sometimes God does not send a miracle through a loud voice from the sky. Sometimes he sends it through a loyal dog that refuses to stop searching, through a child brave enough to tell the truth, through a father who leaves behind one last light, or through a broken man who still chooses to do what is right when revenge would be easier. Cole thought he had lost everything when his family pushed him out, but God was not closing a door to punish him. He was leading him to the place where his pain could become purpose. In our daily lives, We may not stand in front of a stormy lighthouse or uncover a hidden crime, but many of us carry silent battles, family wounds, fear, regret, or loneliness that no one else can see. This story reminds us that God can use even the darkest season to guide us toward healing, justice, and a new home for the heart. Never believe your story is over just because people walked away from you. God may still be preparing a light ahead, and sometimes the ones who seem lost are the very ones He chooses to help others find their way back. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment, Amen, if you believe God can turn pain into purpose. And subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, redemption, and miracles. May God bless you, protect your family, heal your hidden wounds, and guide you toward the light He has already prepared for you.